Drought conditions in the Midwest continue to take their toll on crops and livestock this summer, and farmers may be wondering if there is any relief in sight. With us today to focus on current weather and crop conditions is USDA meteorologist Ray Martha. Ray, first of all, what is the situation with the drought in the Midwest?
Well, conditions are deteriorating rapidly. In the northern Great Plains yesterday, record-breaking high temperatures continued to aggravate the situation in North Dakota in particular. Moving into the Corn Belt, there has been some relief with cooler air moving into much of the eastern half of the nation, but virtually all of the major crop areas were dry again yesterday and are continuing dry today.
Now, how is the spring wheat crop being affected by these conditions?
Very seriously. The latest crop condition estimates are now putting much of the crop in the poor to very poor category in all of the major producing states, from Montana, the Dakotas, into Minnesota, areas that have been well below normal rainfall over the past few months and extremely excessive heat during the early portion of the crop establishment. Now with the crop rapidly advancing into what is normally the most critical weather-sensitive heading stage at a much faster rate than normal, conditions are, as I said earlier, deteriorating rapidly because of the lack of moisture and the heat, and the condition is not favorable at all for the spring wheat crop.
What about corn and soybeans, Ray? Are they under the same type of stress conditions?
Yes, they are. What makes this situation so, in a way, unique is that we're having these typical summer conditions so early in the season. We normally look for a crop to get established and then expect the July and August heat waves and periodic dry spells to aggravate the crops. But this year, with this heat and dryness starting so early in the season, crops getting a very unfavorable start, and now we're looking at the crops normally going into that weather-sensitive period in fair to mostly poor conditions. So it's a very difficult year for those crops.
Ray, what effect has this drought had on wind erosion? Some reports are indicating that this situation is as bad as the Dust Bowl of the 30s. Is that true?
Well, I guess in some areas I'm sure it is, because you can start making comparisons when those topsoils dry out, like they have in many areas in the northern plains and some areas of the Midwest, and you get any wind, you're certainly going to get wind erosion taking away some of that topsoil. So as far as a comparison with the 30s, I'm not sure if we can really make that comparison with that Dust Bowl period, because that was over a several-year period, and this is a one-year episode, but it is certainly very serious for this year.
How do things stand for the coming weeks? Will this heat continue?
Well, the latest National Weather Service 6 to 10 day outlook is not all is unfavorable. It's calling for mostly above normal temperatures and mostly below normal rainfall in much of these areas. So the outlook is currently not very good for the crops, looking at the weather in the next few days.
USDA meteorologist Ray Martha. In Washington, I'm Deborah Jennifer reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has established a toll-free telephone hotline to answer questions about services available as drought conditions across the U.S. continue to plague the nation's farmers. With us today to talk about this hotline and its importance is Peter Myers, Deputy Secretary of Agriculture. And Mr. Secretary, first of all, bring us up to date on the drought situation as it stands currently.
Well, it's continuing to get worse as we see lack of rainfall, any measurable rainfall all over the biggest part of the growing areas of the United States. And of course we're especially concerned about the Corn Belt as we enter the crucial time for pollination in the next week or so in the major corn producing states.
Now, the hotline, how effective has it been so far, and how many calls have you received?
As of last night, and that was just like a day and a half or 2 days into the hotline, we have over 1,100 calls that we received, and we have 20 people answering these phones, talking to people, counseling with some people, believe it or not, but basically answering questions mainly about USDA issues that they're concerned about.
Now, where are you receiving the greatest number of calls?
There's about 8 or 9 states, and they're concentrated more in the Midwest, the Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, in that area, Indiana, Ohio, basically. Missouri, I noticed, was one of my state that had produced a lot of calls.
Now, what type of information are the counselors
Well,
giving?
they're asking a lot about our programs, and of course we're trying to answer on the spot, and we have an ASCS person in there to answer or help answer the technical questions. The questions that we can't answer on the spot, that we cannot, we refer to one of our agencies or to another government agency like the Corps of Engineers, and within 24 hours we give those answers back to the folks that have called in.
Are there other federal agencies involved?
Very definitely. Now, USDA is running the hotline, and it's our career people and some of our Schedule C people that are answering the phones 10 hours a day and Saturday morning. But there are other people involved in that we refer questions to other departments of government.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to take you off track a little
Sure.
bit here. There were some reports that there have been some changes regarding the Emergency Feed Assistance Program. What are those changes?
Well, we're looking at changes today to see if we can't provide feed for not only the folks that have totally run out of feed, but some of the better managers that maybe foresee the fact that they're not going to have a hay crop for this winter, this type of thing. So we're looking at things today even, and as the time this program goes on in a few days, these changes may be announced in press releases.
What is the hotline number, and what are the times available for those people interested to call?
Okay, the line is an 800 number, 1-800-541-3375. They can call, and this is Eastern time, they can call from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, Monday through Friday, and again from 8 until 1 in the afternoon on Saturdays. So we've got folks, government folks that are putting in a lot of extra hours answering these calls.
Thank you very much, Peter Myers, Deputy Secretary of Agriculture. In Washington, I'm Deborah Jonathan reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Consumer demand is expected to be larger than crop production this year, And the above normal temperatures and below average rainfall in many areas will likely result in reduced income for producers, prompting commodity market prices to boost. We'll examine the agricultural outlook in our discussion with Clark Edwards, an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service. Clark, range and pasture conditions have been worsening. What's the expected income impact on livestock producers?
Well, of course, it's darkening the prospects. Some of the range and pasture conditions are worse than they've been in over half a century. This is forcing more supplemental feeding, and it's forcing some cattle onto markets a little earlier than they would have come, which brings the prices down. So higher feed costs, lower prices received. That's part of the drought picture. Of course, the higher feed costs are because we have drought affecting the crops as well. There's a lot of variation in the way that the drought is hitting farmers. For example, the spring wheat is an example of an area where pretty much past tense the drought has already been a disaster for a number of people. Some of the corn areas are an example where it's hard to say yet. Some of the corn is already wiped out. Some of it doesn't look, there's a stand there, and if it gets rain in the next week or two, there'll be some crop there. If we don't, then there's not. So some reasons we don't know about. The peculiar thing is that some areas are not doing too badly despite all of this. For example, the fall planted crops harvested before the drought was any problem, and are being sold into markets where the prices are being pushed up by the drought conditions. So those farmers are having better incomes. There's about 3,000 counties in the United States, and about half of them are listed as having significantly higher temperatures and lower rainfall than usual. The other half, of course, is not in the bad shape. So the main thing that's going on as we talk about farm income isn't so much the aggregate income as the terrific changes in income for individual farmers from what it would have been had there been no drought. Some are total disaster areas, and those farmers know who they are already. Some of them possible disaster areas, and we'll know that if it rains or not in the next couple of weeks. And some of them are not too much affected.
One of the ingredients in the manufacture of ethanol is grain.
Right.
And what is the drought going to do to that?
Well, that's asking a short one question about a long-run phenomenon. If we move into ethanol production for grain, we do it on expectations of grain prices being relatively low, which are not this year, compared to either to the petroleum prices or at least to the subsidized prices that ethanol would move into the gasoline markets at. I expect the price of corn rise that we've had so far would be equivalent to adding something close to $10 to a barrel of oil to stay competitive with what it would have been before the drought.
Clark Edwards, an agricultural outlook. In Washington, Vic Powell reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Above normal temperatures and below average rainfall in many areas will likely result in reduced income for many producers. We'll examine the agricultural outlook in our discussion with Clark Edwards, an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service. Clark, farm net cash income was earlier predicted to be about even with last year's figures. What's the drought going to do to that?
Well, the interesting thing about the drought, well, interesting academically, but not if you're living in the middle of one, of course, is that it's changing the incomes for farmers from what they would have been without the drought in a variety of ways. And by that I mean some farmers are definitely losing lots of money this year over the drought, because of the drought. Some are likely to lose money if it doesn't rain in the next couple of weeks. Others are actually coming out ahead because they have enough to sell and the prices are being moved up by the drought conditions. And the question is, you're asking now, is how does this all average out for all 2 million farmers? The interesting thing about that is that it leaves farm income, cash income, near where it was last year. What happens is, for the sector as a whole, when output drops some, which it's doing, then prices go up, right? And with agricultural commodities, prices tend to go up by more than the output went down. In other words, the total revenues can be increasing. So one would expect ordinarily for cash receipts to be rising. Cash expenses are rising to offset some of that. Farm program payments are going down, will offset some of that. But the net result is relatively little change in the aggregate. Now, the thing to watch is if you're looking at all 2 million farms and wondering about the income, say as a person selling fertilizer or machinery into the farm sector, the cash flows are going to be about the same as last year, if that's what determines your market. On the other hand, the individual farmers are experiencing a terrifically different kind of income than they were expecting, some making more, some making less, so that the farm disaster this year is real, but it's not universal. Some farmers have already, past tense, have had real problems. Some, if it doesn't rain in the next week or two, will join that group and have real problems. Others are either their crops are already in, or they've got irrigation and their water supplies are still there. Some irrigation is threatened, but some is there. And the average is little change, surprisingly enough, in the total cash income to the farm sector.
So what's the situation and outlook for farm machinery this year?
Well, sales are going to be up somewhat this year with the, as we said, the farm income is going to be about equal to last year. So in the aggregate, there's the purchasing power. The reason that question is asked a lot now is that sales had surged recently, going away from their usual seasonal pattern. And that turns out to have been not a surge in demand so much as a change on the supplier's side of inducing farmers with price reductions to buy their machinery then. We're kind of past that and back on normal upward track.
Clark Edwards and the Agricultural Outlook. In Washington, Vic Powell reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Hello, I'm Chris Larson. Recently, a three-person livestock, oilseeds, and grain team from USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service visited several provinces in the People's Republic of China to learn firsthand more about livestock and grain production in that area. With me today is Mike Humphrey of the Foreign Agricultural Service Oilseeds and Products Division. Mike, what is the livestock and poultry division, or situation rather, in China today, and what is going on there in terms of their production? Are they able to meet the demand?
Well, first of all, I'd like to highlight the reasons for the delegation. The team went to the PRC to look at the current production of livestock and poultry, to look at the current export products, and to look at the shift from the traditional animal husbandry and production techniques to the new, more centralized and larger, more economical production enterprises. The team did travel through 3 of the 5 top livestock producing provinces and 2 of the major municipalities, Beijing and Tianjin. In regards to your question then, we see many developments in China. The People's Republic of China has decided to expand livestock and poultry production. They're doing that through a number of different ways. First of all, in the area of poultry, they are importing a large amount of equipment right now and technology from Malaysia, the United States, from European countries, and other countries around the world. They are increasing their production from 2.1 million tons currently to estimated 6 million tons by 1992. In the area of livestock production, they're bringing in new breeds of hogs to improve the hog varieties to a more lean hog than what they have currently. They have a very fat hog. In the area of dairy, they're importing dairy cattle to increase their dairy production. And at the same time, they're developing a compound feed industry, which has made significant progress, because in 1987 it was 24 million tons, and by 1990 they hope to reach 50 million tons, but I think conservatively speaking they could reach 35 to 40 million tons. So there are some significant developments in this area.
Well, how is China changing agriculturally in terms of the way that they manage their production for their own people and for exports?
Well, back in the late 70s, the government instituted a new system of reforms and provided incentives in agriculture. And what's happening is the farmers now have the incentives out there to produce more. And the government's taken a number of different actions to make it more attractive, and they have now disbanded the state and collective farms by and large, and localized and given responsibility to the farmers, and production is increasing.
So what is the long-range outlook in terms of imports, exports, and their own situation, being able to feed their own people?
China is deficit in feed grains. They must import a certain amount. There is surplus production in the north and deficit in the south, where the livestock sector is growing. We see a situation where China will continue to squeeze a certain amount of exports and import a certain quantity in the south to maintain this livestock and poultry industry and develop the compound feed industry.
Thank you, Mike. With me today is Mike Humphrey of the Oilseeds and Products Division of the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service. I'm Chris Larson.